What's up, Wizards? It's Dev from The Place, and it is time for my favorite video of each season. Because, you know, Tarkir Dragonstorm might be the most loved set in a really long time. People like this set more than Bloomborough, from what I can tell online, and that is really saying something as we return to form for a Magic the Gathering set. We got big dragons. There's not a single person wearing a hat, no pun names in sight. I actually, as a content creator, get to make the puns. Thanks for that, Wizard. You've been taking my job for the last few sets here. Now, with that said, there are still plenty of cards somehow going under the radar as people pay a lot of attention to these huge dragons and these giant payoffs that cost 1,000,000 mana. It turns out there are plenty of cards in this set that people are not paying enough attention to as they kind of look at all this other great stuff. And hey, it makes sense. I like big ugly dragons too, but as a consequence, there's so much going overlooked in this set that is of even greater power than those huge dragons. So let's take a look at the top 10 sleepers in Tarkir Dragonstorm.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back. Hey, real quick, make sure you hit the thumb button, sub to the sandwich, do all the stuff. I got a Patreon, check it out. But I'm going to go ahead and get on to it here because even though we're only looking at 10 cards, I, of course, have 3 honorable mentions. It's not 5, I guess there's that, but these are all cards that I've kind of pointed out for the limited environment, and they look kind of sleepery there, but they also look just unassuming enough to see some standard play if we get the right decks. So let's take a look at Kishla Trawlers first. Not going to spend too much time on this. I just kind of freaked out about it during the pre-release guide, but I think it's going to be great for that environment in limited because it can just buy back a removal spell for you, and that's kind of nice. But in standard, these occasionally see play, again, given the right deck. And they've even seen some play at higher mana costs, you know, like what was it, Shipwreck Dowser or something, saw like really sparing play during its time in standard, mostly as part of like wacky combo decks. And I could see Trawlers doing the same thing, especially given its like relatively low casting cost. And I'm not trolling or trawling here whatsoever. I think there might be something to this card, and I want to give it plenty of Hugslas as well as Kisslas. But another card that I've kind of pumped up a good bit for the limited environment, especially in the pre-release guide again, is Krumar Initiate. I'm going to do you a favor and not call this card Herald and Krumar again. I feel like I'm overusing that joke, but what I am going to do is once again compare this card to a Phyrexian Processor. And if you don't think that's a powerful card, maybe check out my episode of Shuffle Up and Play. That card killed me because the professor paid 20 freaking life for it. But this isn't quite Phyrexian Processor as much as I want to keep comparing it to that card. Phyrexian Processor, you pay the life for once. This should pay the life for every time, which is booty. However, it costs half of what a Phyrexian Processor does, and it's pretty noteworthy that if you paid 5 life for a Phyrexian Processor and you're at 5, well, you just can't use it anymore. It was a pretty expensive card to cast in terms of both mana and life, right? But now it's just sitting there on the table like a grapefruit. No one's going to eat it. With this guy, if you're at 5, you can pay a life and a couple of mana to make a 1/1 and block your opponent's huge dude. Making jump blockers is all right. As a matter of fact, this isn't quite a processor, and it isn't quite a Bitter Blossom either, but I also want to kind of compare it to cards like that and Skrell's Hive, because for the cost of, sure, a couple of mana a turn, but also just 1 life a turn, you can get a 1/1 every turn of the game, and that is actually proven in the past to be really good. Again, sure, it's going to cost you some mana or whatever, but I don't think that's actually that big of a deal. Again, this is not necessarily a card that I think is like destined for standard play, but I do think there's something about it. It's parked in the honorable mentions because, again, I'm not sure how much faith I actually have in it, but I do think it's a card worth mentioning, which it's right there in the name. I think that's probably a decent HM, but the last card I want to talk about is Synchronized Charge. So again, like I said, these are all cards that I've kind of talked up a bit in the limited environment from time to time, and I wasn't sure this is going to end up being a sleeper, which is why I'm glad that I have 3 HMs this time around, because I do think this card needs to be brought up just a little bit, you know, for just a couple of mana. In your +1/+1 counters deck, you get an effective overrun. It even gives you a couple of counters, which is pretty sick for just a couple of mana. But again, if you've got like, I don't know, a couple of dudes with counters on them already, and you put counters on a couple more dudes, and suddenly you're getting in for like a ton of damage, trample, and vigilance, by the way. This is an overrun effect that doesn't necessarily expect to win the game on the spot, so it also gives you real protection against the crack pack. And don't forget that you got a couple of +1/+1 counters, so when you do go to block on the next turn with all that vigilance you got, you're going to have slightly larger dudes. So again, I think that things like Craterhoof Behemoth are obviously taking like top marquee over a card like this, but this might be a little more push than it looks when you first read it. Let's get to the actual list here so I can start talking about cards I actually have like some amount of faith in. Like number 10, which is Rainveil Rejuvenator. Now, this is kind of a Kami of Whispered Hopes, which I was going to call Kami of False Hopes. That turns out that's a completely different card, so I'm glad I looked it up on Scryfall before I started this take. But one way or the other, it's a bit like that card. Now, I don't think, again, that this makes Agatha's Soul Cauldron like a real deck day one just because it exists, but it is nice to have some effective redundancy with Kami, right? One thing about Kami that I like that it has over this card is not just the casting cost, but the fact that it's got this kind of hardened scales effect on it, which does matter a good bit in Agatha's Soul Cauldron from time to time. But you know what else matters? Milling cards, and this can mill a few when it comes into play, and even despite the slightly bolstered casting cost, I still think that this is probably playable in that deck for just redundancy purposes. Again, we'll see if it does something to rejuvenate those Soul Cauldron decks in Standard, but I just think it's kind of a cool dude. In and of itself, I like it, but we'll move on and seize the opportunity to move to number 9 here with Seize Opportunity. This is Quick Study in red. It's really good. I keep saying that it's kind of an upgraded divination with an instant speed effect. Yeah, we call that Quick Study. We actually have that card in Standard right now, Dev. It's not, though. It's not quite Quick Study, but it does give you whole turn to play the cards. I'll take that, man. It gives you like a whole turn cycle to play the cards. And apart from that, sometimes you can use it as kind of a combat trick to either blow your opponent out after blocks or just deal an extra 4 damage, which can sometimes win you the game if you did the math right. Now, I'll admit that this doesn't look like the most powerful or playable card in the world, but in a lot of ways, neither did Quick Study when it first came out. You had a fair number of Magic players saying, oh, wow, 3 mana, instant speed, draw 2, that's just a better divination. That's a really good card. But then you had an equal number of players, it felt like, who would respond with, why? Why is that exciting at all? But it turned out the Quick Study did see some play and still sees some play in control decks. It's a fairly efficient way to draw cards. Now, the one thing Quick Study has over this is that when the control player plays Quick Study, they can keep the cards that it drew them for 6 turns if they need to, right? This does not allow that, but it does have an extra mode on it that's really good for any deck trying to attack. And to be honest, even control decks are attempting to attack nowadays. This gets 2 Fountain Port tokens in for 6 damage in the right situation, and it's really not that hard to envision that situation. Let's go ahead and move on to number 8, because I really don't think you should need that much convincing that this is a decent Magic card. I just haven't really seen anybody talk about it, and they should. So let's move on to number 8, which kind of fits that criteria too. At least for Commander, this is Yathan Tomb Guard. Now, Nathan over here is actually a really good card draw engine, again, in Commander for those +1/+1 counter decks. I'm not sure how great it's going to actually be in Standard, but it's worth noting that it's not a completely downgraded Gix, given that it is a lot easier to cast, and it's not going to cost you any life. So I guess it's got a chance if there's some sort of Golgari or Abzan counters deck in Standard, but I'm again looking more at a format like Commander, where you need redundancy in a singleton format with your other card draw engines, and this does that, but you also have a little bit more time to kind of set things up and freely play this card without worrying about skipping your turn or anything. I guess this could technically have some relevance the turn it hits the table. If you have, a 1-mana guy and a 2-mana guy that both get +1/+1 counters, well, yeah, slam this guy on 3, draw a card pretty easily, I think, some of the time. So there's definitely some real steez to this card in a format like EDH, where, again, you got a little bit more breathing room to set this guy's lines up. Now, we're at number 7, and this one might look a little bit weird, like, why is it on this list? Well, for one, it's at number 7 because it's not necessarily a card people are unaware of, but at the same time, I think that it's getting lost in the shuffle of not only the big dragons and stuff, but some of the other cards in its own cycle. We're going to take a look at Great Arashin City here. You could call it Arashin, but I really don't like saying Arashin. It's like, hey, Dev, why are you so itchy today? Well, I got a ration, So let's go with Arashin City here. Any land that can make a 1/1 dude, I'm pretty excited about. And now, again, a lot of people are excited about some of these lands, The blue one has gotten the most press because it's going to go in every blue deck, and you're going to win those mirror matches when you get it first. But as far as, the white one goes, that one makes twice as many creatures as this one. People are pumped about it. I see why. When it comes to the red and green ones, people aren't really talking too much about those either, but the green one fixes your draws, and the red one kind of draws you a card. Those are decent Commander. The black one has kind of been right in the middle as far as public perception, and I actually think that it needs to come up some, because, any land that can make a dude for you, I get pretty excited about. I am still playing Kildor and Outpost from 1996 in my Commander decks, and that one makes you sack up planes. This one just wants you to have some dudes in your yard, and it pays you by giving you more dudes. That is fantastic, in my opinion. But number 6 kind of terrifies me a little bit too, to be honest, even though Each and every person watching this video on several separate occasions has told me I should not be scared of it. My number 6, and yes, I'm still teasing it here, is a card you might be aware of if you watch the channel, because I have soapboxed for it maybe 5 or 6 times this preview season, and every time I do it, my chat or my comment section tells me, Dev, you're a big old dum-dum. Still going to watch your stuff, think you're nice, think you're funny, think you're cool, but I cannot agree with you on new way forward, and that's fine. We can all have our opinions, and we can still have the sleepover. You bring the pizza, I'll bring the soda, we'll play Mario Party all night. We can still chill if we have differing opinions on this card, but allow me to proselytize for it just one more time during preview season, because I think if nothing else, we've got a pretty premium sideboard card on our hands here. Is it worth 5 mana for a fog on one guy? No, it just isn't. I mean, I can agree with you on there, but I think that that's where a lot of people are kind of terminating their line of thought on this card, and it's not just a fog effect for one guy. This can save you from taking like 20 damage from a huge effect, but most importantly, even if it fogs a medium dude, you're drawing like 4 cards off of it, which is a buttload of cards, scientific term. I definitely think there's something to this, and I'm not going to stop saying that until it like absolutely fails the most that it possibly can, which I'm not denying it might, but even if this card face plants for the first couple of weeks, I'm still going to be in the corner like, it could happen, man. It could happen, so I'm just never going to give up on it. But we are halfway down this list officially, and for number 5, we're going to start looking at cards that I have real true faith in and not just contrarianism dressed up as medium intelligence arguments. Number 5 is Kishla Skimmer, a card that is very easy to miss if you're just skimming through these previews. But don't let this name fool you. This ain't skim or even 2%. This is the whole milk right here, baby. This is a 2-mana 2/2 flyer, and if nothing else, that's a pretty decent, like, floor on the card. 2-mana 2/2 flyer is just kind of efficient in and of itself, but the moment you activate your Ghost Vacuum and draw a card off of it, that seems great. The moment you activate your Great Arishan City, we were just talking about that, draw a card, that seems good. And obviously in Insidious Roots, this is a crazy card, and that deck has already been toying with going Sultai from time to time, and this gives it a real reason to do so. You are going to draw a lot of cards in Insidious Roots with this, but you know, even beyond the deck it's obviously supposed to go in, there is a lot to do with this. We just got Harmonize and Renew, 2 mechanics that draw cards off of this thing in one set. But we already had flashback cards and a bunch of other stuff that works out of the graveyard. Even non-key name stuff, you know, like Fairy Dream Thief is a good example of a creature that can just leave your graveyard, right? And draw 2 cards because you have a Kishla Skimmer in play. Not sure how powerful that interaction is, but there's a lot of other powerful interactions you can get set up with this card on turn 2, whether you're reanimating creatures to the board or you're just putting them back in your hand from your graveyard. All that is going to draw you cards. Helping Hand will draw you cards. There are a lot of ways, if you can't tell what I'm getting at, to draw cards off of this. And if it costs 3 or 4 mana, I wouldn't even be really talking about it, but this is super efficient at just 2 mana, and then on subsequent turns, you can pretty easily draw cards off of this. Just an absolutely stupid Magic card that I'm kind of amazed they printed in some ways, but it's another one that I really haven't heard many more people than just this fat guy talk about this preview season. I think it's a massive mistake. This card is very good. But my number 4 is Hardened Tactician. He made it all the way up here, dude. Usually I don't want to eat hard tack, but this dude looks pretty delicious. And I gotta come out and say, this is probably another Commander sleeper, but like way more than Yathan Tombguard. I think this really has chops in Standard, at least potentially. Now, these like black-white decks, and of course the Abzan decks and beyond, have a lot of stuff they want to play at 3 mana. 3 is a really, really powerful casting cost in current Standard, and whether or not you play this over a card like Preacher the Schism, or Glissa Sunslayer, or Liliana of the Veil, or even some of the 3 mana options that Aristocrats decks have. And obviously this card might want to go in Aristocrats, but there's like 4 really, really good 3 mana options that those decks don't even play right now because they mostly want to raise the past there, guys. 3 mana guys don't count. I think this guy is probably going to have the same issue in Standard, but it's at least worth bringing up that in Standard, this will, you know, sacrifice all your little dorky tokens, whether they're from Mirex, Fountain Port, Great Arishan City, any of your lands, whatever. But obviously there's a ton of stuff that makes other creature tokens right now, but there's obviously stuff that makes map tokens, clue tokens. So note that this says any old token can be sacrificed. So if your opponent like Get Lost, one of your dudes, play a Hardened Tactician, pay a couple of mana, draw some cards off your map tokens. It's actually not too hard, in the same deck with like a Sentinel of the Nameless City that's constantly making map tokens. This looks okay, so I don't completely like shut this out of seeing any standard play, but it's got an uphill battle. Again though, in Commander, where you've got a little bit more time to get set up and a little bit more mana once you do get set up, something like this is going to draw a billion cards. This is a real card draw engine in Commander. Well, welcome to the top 3, everybody. We made it, and my number 3 is a card that is here specifically because of one interaction that I don't think the majority of the community is quite aware of yet. Let's take a look at Taigem Master Opportunist. Because you see, through a quirk of the rules, and you can trust me on this or not, you can Google it, and I promise you, this is correct. If you play a Taigem on turn 2, and then let's say turn 3 you intend to impend an Overlord of the Hauntwoods. Let's just say you want to do that. Well, what's going to end up happening is that you will get a copy of that Overlord on the table with no impending counters. And yes, I promise you this works. I've seen a few posts online now where people point out this interaction and then judges come in and say, it doesn't work that way because rule 27.02. And then another judge has to come in and be like, actually, it absolutely does work that way, and here's why. And I'm not going to go into all the wonkery of why it works the way it does. All I know is that if you play an Overlord when you have this guy out, you're going to get a suspended copy, sure, but you'll also get a copy on the table that has no impending counters and is a creature right then and there the same turn you cast it. And if for some reason you still think this interaction doesn't work the way I'm telling you it does, I'm just either stupid or a liar or perhaps both, then I implore you to Google things before you write down comments on the internet. Number 2 is Twin Maw Stormbrood. As a matter of fact, both my 2 and 1 ended up being Stormbroods here. I have a lot of faith in a couple of these. So see if you can guess what number 1's going to be, but Twin Maw was almost number 1. I think this card is just astronomically good. Seriously, Twin Maw Stormbrood is unbelievably good, man. This is 5 damage to a creature, and then you can draw it again later in the game. It's a removal spell that doesn't just go to your graveyard, and I think that enough people aren't really talking about that with any of these Stormbroods. In some cases, people are talking about it like it's a downside. Like, I'm going to draw this later. I don't want to do that. Like, yes, you do. When you draw it later, you either get a removal spell that takes out a really important creature over there, or you get a creature that invalidates all their boys that also gains you 5 life. I think people are looking at the enter the battlefield trigger on the dragon here and just saying ho-hum, but 5 life is a quarter of your starting life total. If you can get to this against any deck that's trying to wreck your life total as quickly as possible, you just win the game. It's a huge dude that they're going to have a hard time attacking into that also gains you 5 life. 2 bolts, that's a dry burst lightning and a lightning strike they have to draw now to recover that from your life total, and you get a huge dude. So I like the dragon part of it too, don't get me wrong, but the removal spell is a knockout here, dude. Right now in standard we have Obliterating Bolt, sorcery speed, 4 damage, exile it if it kills them. That sees a small amount of play, 1 or 2 of in certain decks like Team or Doppelgang here and there. This, I think, has a chance of seeing a lot more play. The only problem I can see with it is that it's red-white. So if you're playing white, well, you also have Get Lost and Lay Down Arms and Sunfall and all these typically better removal spells for the most part. But I still think you can work this in, not only as another removal spell, which those decks are kind of always looking for anyway, but again, as a huge finishing threat, which those decks are always looking for anyway. There's just not a bad thing about this card, which is kind of different than all the other cards we've talked about today. At least the last 8 of these I've had to slam in some way or another or be realistic about their standard playability. And I think I have to be realistic about this too, but I just can't come up with too many negatives for this card. But we'll move on to number 1 here. What do I think, in terms of Stormbroods, is even better than Twin Maw Stormbrood? Well, this time around, it's Purging Stormbrood. Do you really understand how good +2/+2 and lifelink and hexproof is? Oftentimes, when your opponent is trying to cast a removal spell on a guy, it's during your attack step. Either you declare attacks and before you attack, or you go ahead and tap your creatures down and swing them in. That's when your opponent's going to rip off that go for the throat or something. Well, in this case, not only do you counter the go for the throat, but you also get in for more damage with your creature and its lifelink. I just really think a lot of people are just kind of mentally discarding the fact that this gives the creature lifelink, whereas in some ways, I think it's kind of the second best part of the entire card. Hexproof is the best part of the card. This just being a counter spell for removal is almost good enough, but when you throw in the pump and the lifelink, I actually have a weird feeling You guys know those kind of Mardu decks? Sometimes they're Mardu that play like, Heartfire Hero, but they also play the guy with an adventure that allows you to like sacrifice a creature for 1 red mana and deal damage equal to the creature's power to a player. That guy, the Knight. Oftentimes, those decks don't even have a way to play the Knight half of that. They just use their red mana to cast the adventure half. I wonder if we're going to get into a similar thing with this, right? I'm not sure that this is as worthy of casting as, the thing that lets you fling a creature in certain decks. But I will say that there are, Boros Mice decks, for instance, that this would actually work extremely well in, man, especially in mirror matches. Anything against aggro, not only are you canceling out their lightning strike or their burst lightning or whatever they're trying to get rid of your mouse with, right? But you're also getting in a bunch of lifelink damage that turn. Even if you're just like on blocks or something, you're getting in a ton of lifelink damage that turn. So just the fact that, the white spell half of this exists in the first place, I think that we could see a similar situation where people just like play the white half and don't even care about resolving the black half, right? But that said, the dragon half of this is still pretty good. I mean, it's a relatively decently large flyer that's somewhat hard to actually get rid of because of the ward ability. But also, I think that when you get the full value and you're actually able to pull a counter or 3 off of a creature, then it's a pretty sick magic card. But, the fact that it comes stapled to a giant dragon is just all upside. There's really no downside or reason to complain about that. I just think the spell half of this is so good that we need to bring it up. Again, it's not an adventure, but in this case, I think that works well for it because let's say you're playing against this card. Let's say you're doing that. If you were just playing against like Shard Mage's Rescue or something, well, they've already played 2 Shard Mage's Rescue this game and there are only 45 cards into their library. What's the chance they have another Shard Mage's Rescue, right? Same math doesn't apply to a card like this. They've already used this card twice to, counter my removal. They still have 4 copies in their deck somewhere, right? Like that same math doesn't apply. And I think that makes a huge difference. Your opponent might always have a counter spell for your removal because they're carrying 4 copies of this. And I could go on. Honestly, there is a lot to say about this card, and it's obviously a massive scourge in limited, which I've brought up in other videos before, but haven't really talked enough, I think, about like its real standard playability. I think it's got a lot. But that is Itski Lewitsky, everybody. You want to see a few more sleeper picks? Well, me and Power Dragon just got together a few days ago. We talked about all the underrated cards in the set. We had 5 choices apiece, and I didn't repeat any of my choices from this video to that video. So if you want to see 10 more sleepers that we think might come out of this set, go over to Power Dragon's channel, check that video out. I'll leave a link in the description. Conversely, we also talked about all the most overrated cards in the set. So if you want basically the exact opposite of this video, then I'll leave a link to that one. We did that on my channel. But we're actually not quite done here because now it's your turn. Go. We're actually not quite done here because it's your turn now, right? One of the reasons why the sleeper videos are my favorite videos of each season are, sure, I like putting them together. I like talking about cards no one else is talking about. These are exciting things, but I also like seeing your comments. There's a bunch of different kinds of comments. You talk about which ones are and are not actually sleepers. That's a fun part of the discourse. You talk about how much all my picks suck. That's a fun part of the discourse right there. But you also tend to talk about what cards you would pick as sleepers that didn't make my list. And I'm really interested in that too. Like, what cards do you think aren't getting enough attention this season? This is a very, very hyped set. But that said, I really can't think of a set in recent memory, the last 5 or 6 years, that's been this hyped, but also had so much sleeper potential. So it's a neat question. What do you think deserves some more attention from this set? But with that, I am, in fact, donezo for this one, so just do all the YouTube stuff, hit the thumb button, sub to the sandwich. Again, check out the Patreon, just $1 a month to vote on what decks we're doing this season. And apart from that, that is Alski Kowalski. I think that's the one I haven't used yet, so I'll use it now. Either way, I'm Dev from The Place, guys. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.